direction in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Rushanara.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chancellor. Just to be clear, it's not a unanimous view, the scepticism about OBR forecasting. So Mr. Maron doesn't. We don't all share his views. Just to be clear. So Chancellor, you've obviously been focused on stabilising the economy after what happened in February, in part because the Chancellor, your predecessor, and the former Prime Minister chose to fly blind and make announcements, economic announcements, without an OBR forecast. So I just want to take you back to where we are at the moment. The OECD has warned that the UK will be have the lowest growth among the big group of 7 industrial countries next year. Only Russia, facing sanctions from the West over its attack on Ukraine, will perform worse. The OBR has reported that living standards will fall by 7% over the next 2 years, and the Governor of the Bank of England to this committee and elsewhere has mentioned the differences between the UK and Eurozone. Eurozone growth rates are 2.1%, US growth rate 4.2%, and yet the UK economy is 0.7% smaller than at the start of the pandemic. And just to finish off, by 2024, people's disposable incomes will have gone back to 2013 levels, and we are likely to see by 2027 and 28 a third of people's disposable income being reduced per capita. So we've seen all of this happen over a number of years, particularly over over those crucial few months. Credibility issues are credibility on the line internationally. And somebody described, I forget who it is, that the British people are paying a moron premium, not a moral premium, a moron premium is being paid by the British public. What's the point of having the Conservatives in government with that legacy, Chancellor? Well, and I appreciate you've inherited a poisoned chalice, but on behalf of your government over the last 12 years, perhaps you can explain to the British public what the point is of your party in government.
Well, I'm going to answer that question in a less party political way than it was asked. Because you can
your
take...
Your party has been in power for 12 years, with respect.
Ms. Ali, will you let me answer your question? Because I would like to give you a proper answer. You can take a snapshot of economic statistics to tell you any story you like. So you can look at this year's growth, and the UK is the fastest in the G7. You can look at next year's, and we're one of the slowest, according to some projections. If you say what's the point of my party, I would say, well, since we've been in office in 2012, we have the third highest growth in the G7, which is something...
Since 2010.
Since 2010. We have the third highest... Thank you for that, Chair. We have the third highest growth in the G7, and that is over a period when we've had 3 global shocks to contend with the financial crisis, the pandemic, and the energy crisis. And so I think that's a record that we can defend very comfortably. If you look at more recent but longer period of time, the OECD report that you talked about says that since 2020 we have had the fastest of any G7 country, the fastest recovery from the pandemic. But I think there are some very big economic challenges we face that are not related necessarily to those shocks, and I am very keen to address those. So I am concerned that employment is still, from memory, 334,000 lower than pre-pandemic, when in a number of our peer countries employment levels are back to what they were pre-pandemic. That's why I asked Mel Stride, the Work and Pensions Secretary, or he's doing a review, in fact, for the Prime Minister, to look at the issue of workforce participation. There are many issues that relate to that, the way the benefit system works, childcare arrangements, the decision to retire early, and he's doing that. I think we've got some long-term issues over productivity. That's why in my autumn statement I spent some time talking about the skills challenges we face, where I think we've had a lot of initiatives, but there's still a lot of progress to make. So I don't for one second say that there isn't a lot of work to be done, but I don't agree with your overall suggestion that over the period of time that my party has been in office, we haven't grown impressively given the challenges we face.
We'll agree to disagree. Can I take you onto the OBR figures that state that by 2024 to 25, the tax burden will be at its highest level since the Second World War. Can you talk us through what the impact of such a high tax burden will be on economic growth?
Well, I'm very concerned that if taxes are too high, it makes it difficult to be a modern, dynamic economy. And I'm concerned about the effect on incentives. And I am a Conservative who believes you should bring taxes down. So if you look at what the OBR said, two of the biggest drivers of that increasing cost are debt interest payments, which are now £120 billion a year. That's around double the entire budget of the Ministry of Defence. That's a massive increase from around 40 billion from memory down before the pandemic. So that's one of the big things. And the other big thing is health and care costs, where the ageing population has led to a surge in growth. What do we do to bring those tax rates down? And from memory, I think the forecast projections show that tax as a proportion of GDP goes down from 47% to 43% over the forecast period. But what do we do? First of all, on debt interest, the key thing is to bring down inflation, bear down on interest rates, or support the Bank of England so that they can bear down on interest rates to reduce those debt repayments and to bring down our debt levels. And that's one of the most important reasons why we announced that difficult consolidation. And when it comes to the NHS, I think the answer is real public service reform, because I think the British people want a good, strong NHS. They want to know that every penny is being spent wisely. And that's why we invited Patricia Hewitt to review the way the new integrated care boards work, which are the new structures that are going to determine how the NHS is run, to make sure that we can reduce the micromanagement and targets, which I happen to believe drive a lot of the inefficiency, and really empower local decision making and better use of every pound we spend.
So can I, just on health then, since you brought it up, there are 7 million people waiting. About 117,000 people have died while waiting for treatment. Do you believe that the changes, and then we've got 400,000 people who are economically inactive. One of our witnesses said 2 days ago that that could be a hit of about 0.7% on economic output. That's pretty serious. Do you believe that the investment you're putting in and these reforms that you're proposing, whatever they may be, that's going to be able to bring people back into the economy, those who are willing to work, who are not active because of health issues? Can you give us an assurance that that's going to happen, and by when do we expect, given your expertise in healthcare, both as former health secretary as well as select committee chair, can we see those groups? Because that has a bearing on migration as well, if we want to keep migration down.
Well, that is why we put £8 billion package.
Is it going to happen though? Are we going to be able to get those people who are economically inactive with that investment?
Well, that is, sorry, just to start to answer again, that is the purpose of putting in £8 billion a year. In a context where you are consolidating by £55 billion in tax rises and spending cuts, to choose to put £8 billion into the NHS and social care system is to say you're prepared to have 8 billion more of cuts elsewhere, or 8 billion of tax rises elsewhere to fund it. But we think it's the right thing to do. Yes, because first of all, we are absolutely committed to the NHS, and we want to have first-class health and care in this country, and we think that's what voters want. But secondly, absolutely, because the NHS has a crucial role in helping get people better and get people back into the workforce.
Fortunately, the voters aren't getting the first-class health care that they deserve, and it's good to hear that you are taking your health expertise into the Treasury.
Well,
they are not getting it. People are not getting GP's appointments. They're not getting seen for their treatment. You know about the cases. You've seen it over the years as chair of the select committee. So as the
I've written
Chancellor
a book about
now,
it as well, Miss Ali. But what I would say is that yes, of course, there are major challenges the NHS is facing. But I think it did could I possibly answer your question?
I've got one final question.
But I think it's important to recognise the NHS did an absolutely fantastic job in the pandemic. and they are having to recover from the biggest external shock to their services in the history of the NHS.
And that's why a backhanded compliment, Chancellor, that it's good that you're in the Treasury, given your health background. One final question: the Resolution Foundation has said that since the pandemic, the net result that is that total long-term spending plans are largely unchanged since the start of the pandemic, leaving the consolidation entirely driven by tax rises. Are you comfortable with that?
The consolidation was a combination of tax rises. What I announced in the autumn statement, I think, increases tax as a proportion of GDP by about 1%, and reductions in planned spending to a long-term rate of around 1% in real terms a year. It was planned to go up by much more than that. Now, I think that's going to put pressure on spending, because we know in areas like the NHS it's highly unlikely that you'll be able to contain the growth in spending at 1%. So I don't pretend this isn't anything but going to be challenging, but we are absolutely committed to public services, and that's why we took the decision to find extra money for schools and extra money for the NHS to make sure that they are protected through the worst of a difficult period.
Thanks, Rushanara. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we all agree across the House and across the